Yeah, I just heard the news about Paul Allen passing away, and my connection to him is as the Seahawks owner. Because when I was a little kid, I grew up in a family where my dad had Seahawks season tickets from 1976 up until the early 2000s when we both moved, left the Seattle area, and so I grew up with a dad who was big on the team through better and worse, both the low years and the years when they were doing well. I used to always hear about how I think it was the early to mid '80s, they had a couple playoff runs. They had a good team during those years, and I was born in 1985. So by the time I was old enough to really go to Seahawk games, to tolerate the noise, that was basically the big thing for me. Is once I was able to tolerate the noise, I started going to the games with my dad. Uh, but they were a terrible team, so it was hard to be too enthusiastic. When you're a little kid, you of course like teams to be good. You don't understand the philosophical. Uh, you don't understand, the philosophical insight into supporting a team through thick and thin, and how that's a reflection of your own character. It's a reflection of your own character to like a team when they suck. But when I was a kid, I would go to the Seahawk games. I knew all the players. I was a fan even in the rough years, but I was also a fan of the Cowboys because they were good. They had the star players and all of that. But around the time I really started to understand the rules of football and started to be interested in playing and all of that, Ken Behring, who was the owner, and when I say that name, I feel like I'm talking about a clear villain, but maybe the name just sounds that way to me because I know who he is. But Ken Behring was the owner, and he was trying to move the Seahawks to Anaheim like they were some kind of Disney sideshow. And he actually did take their training camp one year. I believe it was during the off season. It had to have been. And he took them to Anaheim. It was kind of a midnight, just a rush job. He was looking to just pull a fast one on Seattle, sort of like what would later happen to the Seattle Sonics in basketball. But Ken Behring was not popular during that time, and I believe it was the next season. The Seahawks were, of course, still in Seattle. And I remember there was some sort of ceremony. I believe they brought out some Ring of Honor members, some popular players from early on in the Seahawks history. And Ken Behring came out because, being the owner, he was going to participate in that ceremony. And the entire fucking stadium booed him. And just as a kid, as a kid, that was just so cutting. I'd never seen something like that. I mean, I still haven't seen an entire stadium boo one man who's not an athlete. It's not like an athlete who messed up. It's not like somebody threw an interception. It's not like a team was doing badly and they're getting booed. I've never seen an entire football stadium boo one man except in that one instant. And I was this little kid, so it was just incredible. And my dad, who doesn't show a lot of emotion, was just really, he hated the guy too. So he was really excited. He was like, listen. So that goes to show you how people felt about Ken Behring and just how loyal the Seahawks fans were. The Seahawks always had a loyal fan base. Even before they won the Super Bowl and had this hot team a few years ago, there were always a lot of very loyal fans in Seattle. And I think that these good years a few years ago, and they may still be going on, this season's still early on, even though there was a lot of like fair weather fans and things like that. I think what that did, it attracted people outside of the Seattle area, outside of the normal local fan base. And it, of course, made the local fan base pay attention more. Because I know a lot of people who only really pay attention when the team is doing well. And I'm not against fair weather fans. I'm not somebody who, I don't have time to be mad at fair weather fans. And even then, I understand it. Like when I was a kid becoming a fan of the Cowboys, it's like I liked the Seahawks, but it was fun to like root for a team who is going to do well. And a lot of people have so much shit going on in their lives, they don't need to go through the spiritual grind of rooting for a team that's struggling. It's hard to maintain excitement for that and to see the value in that. But anyway, to get back to Paul Allen, Ken Behring was just universally hated in Seattle. The team was at risk, a very strong risk, of getting moved to Anaheim, of all places. And Paul Allen stepped in and bought the team. And, he was a Microsoft guy, so there was a local connection. And what was great about Paul Allen is he was so hands off. Because you look at a lot of the owners around the league, even today, but especially in the past, because this was almost 25 years ago now, over 20 years ago for sure. And, football owners tend to look like caricatures of plutocrats, and they tend to act that way too. And they also like a lot of attention. They like to be this, they act magnanimous. And I'm not trashing football owners. I mean, like, I'm not trashing the wealthy or anything like that. But you look at, like, Jerry Jones, who, as I said, I'm still a Cowboys fan to this day, through thick and thin. You're allowed to like multiple teams, it turns out. Just like you're allowed to be a Fairweather fan, you're allowed to be a not Fairweather fan for more than one team, or a Fairweather fan for more than one team. Life is hard. It doesn't fucking matter how you root for football or when you care about it. But anyway, Paul Allen stepped in, and he was kind of the opposite of the typical football owner. And I don't know historically, like, if there were other guys like that before him, but I feel like he did break the mold a little bit. And he broke the mold in the sense that he made his money in an atypical way. He wasn't some oil tycoon. He wasn't some big business guy. He was, a founder of Microsoft. And I don't know offhand when he got bought out. I don't really know the history of all that stuff. But I grew up in Kirkland, which is where the Seahawks training camp was for many years. It's still very close to there, but it was historically in Kirkland. And so I lived in Kirkland. As I said, my dad was a season ticket holder since 1976. And then Microsoft was next door in Redmond. So I just grew up kind of taking for granted that all these things were there, and you would hear people talk about them all the time, this and that. And I took for granted the fact that there was a football team in Washington, and as a kid being threatened with the idea, like right as I'm falling in love with football and going to the games with my dad, the threat of having that football team taken away. It's like, yeah, that's as kids used to say a few years ago, like a first world problem, but it still sucks. It still sucks, the idea of losing a local football team when you're getting into it. So Paul Allen stepped in, and he was really a hero, truly a city hero. He didn't, save children from, a burning building, but on a wider level, in just terms of like the city's culture, this what the city is. He saved something that ended up staying very important to the city to present day. The Seahawks are an institution in Seattle, and I think this last Super Bowl win really showed that when the team was doing really well. It was nice to see like old people with little Seahawks flags like flapping those. They put them on like the top of where their door opens on their car, and there's like these little flags flapping, like the same sort of flags they'll use. They'll show off their like POW and like American flags on there, but they also show Seahawks flags. It's fun. And there's just a level of camaraderie, too. You think about how at odds people are, especially today. And during those years when the Seahawks were doing extremely well, when they won the Super Bowl and went to the other Super Bowl and all that, like there was a level of camaraderie among people in Seahawks gear and all this stuff that you don't really see in the country at large right now. Even in groups of friends, I feel like there are groups of friends who are more at odds with each other than just Seahawks fans of all backgrounds. Seahawks are going to save the world. That's my whole point here. No, not really, but it's funny how just simple little things, because I know a lot of people, just being someone who's involved in art and, weird music and things like that, people have this tendency to reject sports and reject just jock culture in general, and I don't think they really look at the big picture of it. I'm a fan, of course, but I don't think they look objectively at the bigger picture, because they're just thinking, oh, jocks were mean to me, or if jocks weren't mean to me, I saw movies where jocks were mean to the nerds, and jocks don't like art. Jocks don't like the art world. They have that sort of mentality. And there's a lot of people, though, who are into all of it. And I think the bigger picture of having a team in a city does bring a level of cohesion. And we have Paul Allen to thank for that. And we also have him to thank for stepping back. As I was saying about these owners, these caricatures of plutocrats. Look at Jerry Jones. It's like that guy wants it to be all about him. That guy loves to have the attention on him. He thinks he's, one of the biggest football experts in the world. His opinion matters, really. It doesn't matter. He puts coaches in place who are pretty much just yes men. And nothing against Jason Garrett at all. I don't mind him, but he's pretty middle of the road. But you think about a guy like Jerry Jones or even the Patriots guy. Like I don't have anything against that guy, Robert Kraft, but it's like he's very much in the spotlight. He very much makes it kind of about him. And you see that a lot with owners. I mean, there are these very wealthy men who are controlling an entire sports team. And as I was saying, the level of importance that a sports team has in a city is massive. So, of course, guys with big egos are going to want to get a piece of that attention. Just owning it and profiting off of it isn't enough. But Paul Allen was really the opposite. He was hands off, completely hands off. He let the football people do the football stuff, and he just, I'm sure he wanted to turn a profit. I'm sure this wasn't just an act of charity on his part. I know he also owned the Trailblazers in Portland, the basketball team. But I got a little buzz going here. Not me, but the equipment. Oh well, hopefully it won't ruin everything. But you see a guy like that where he was very hands off, and that got me thinking about just his approach to football. I mean, I think the most demanding thing I think Paul Allen did when he was, owner of the Seahawks, which is weird to say that he's not. As of like 20 minutes ago, I found out that he's no longer the owner of the Seahawks. But the most demanding thing I ever heard was when they won the Super Bowl at the after party where all the team was partying. His band performed all night. Paul Allen's band performed. And you think about that, that's a good opportunity to like kind of hold people hostage. You think about knowing people, if you have friends in bands, friends who make music, they're constantly trying to basically hold people hostage. Like, come to my show. Listen to my music. Have you listened to my music? And you figure Paul Allen, he's the owner. His team won the Super Bowl. That's the perfect opportunity to be like, you're going to listen to my band. And I'm sure it was fun. I'm joking. I'm just joking if it needs to be said. But that was the most demanding thing I think I ever heard of him doing as the owner. And that says a lot about him. But it also, this whole idea got me thinking about Microsoft. And I sort of just took for granted what Microsoft was. I had relatives and I knew some kids whose parents worked for Microsoft in the 90s. Actually, a cousin of mine, she and her husband worked for Microsoft from the very beginning almost, I think from the 80s, which wasn't the beginning, but close to it. And, it didn't really have, Microsoft was thought of as like, oh, they want their employees to be workaholics, but they were never thought of as sinister or bad or like having too heavy of a hand. There was a lot of talk back in the day of like, oh, that's that Microsoft money. That's that Microsoft money coming in. And, you'd see like big houses and things like that. Oh, look, that's that Microsoft money. I bet he works for Microsoft, So there was some of that. There was definitely some animosity because I was, there were multiple generations before me grew up in that Puget Sound, the east side of Puget Sound, where Microsoft ended up being based. I always hold my coffee in these videos and never take a sip because I'm too busy talking. Just needed to do that to prove that it's not a prop. But when you think about like Microsoft, it's like what I'm only appreciating now is how hands-off they seem to have been in terms of their cultural influence. And I say that knowing that their cultural influence was just absolutely massive and widespread. You think about Windows, you think of everything that they created. They were computers, for many years. And of course, people kind of turned on them. It was like, oh, they're a monopoly. Their products suck. Internet Explorer sucks. Who uses Internet Explorer? Oh, you hear about them over there. They're over there using Internet Explorer. So people started to really trash them. I remember people doing that when I was even pretty young, like in junior high even. I remember like nerds trashing Microsoft because it was just sort of, and it was so like, it was like the generic brand of everything. You couldn't really avoid it. But what I'm really appreciating about them now is considering how influential they were, both before the internet and, during the early stages of the internet when it really started to go into people's homes. You think about that level of influence, like that they had that much power before the internet. So many of the powerhouses of today, like Google, Twitter, YouTube, all the social media sites, a lot of even just software and programs are almost entirely internet dependent, and it's just we live in an age when computers are just intrinsically associated with the internet. You think of a computer, you immediately think of it as, oh, that's the device I use to access the internet. And it turns out every single device you use in 2018, and it's been this way for almost, the better part of this decade, every device you use is associated with the internet. It's not just your computer, if you even have one, but every electronic device you have is connected. Everything except our brains are connected, and people are making, moves to do that. Somebody's out there. I bet there's somebody who has Wi-Fi in their brain by now. It's a government experiment or something. I don't know. Not a good joke, but so Microsoft had that level. They had the influence of Google or someone like that before the internet was an institution in our homes and in our world. So they had that kind of influence before you could even do a search for something else, because not everybody had the internet. I don't remember it being that common until probably like 97, 98, and even then people used it sparingly because they were afraid. They were afraid of the pedophiles, and the guys who were going to steal their wife in a chat room, and the guys who were going to steal their identity. It was just, people were terrified of using the internet. It was like they would sign on with their dial-up and sit there like, it was almost like they were like crossing like an alligator-infested river or something. And if you were able to sign out of AOL without having your wife stolen or a pedophile on your kid's heels or, something like that, you had a good internet session, man. In people's minds, at least, that's what they thought. And if you used the internet every day, not only a nerd, but you're sick. You're not just a nerd, you're a sick nerd if you used the internet every day in the late 90s. And so you think about that and the level of influence Microsoft had. Think about Encarta and all that. And so the point that I'm getting at is, what I'm only appreciating now is how non-ideologically driven Microsoft seemed to be despite their level of influence. Because I think we see with these tech companies today, they're definitely infusing a dose of ideology, and they're definitely policing their users, and if nothing else, using algorithms to show preferential treatment for certain things. There's all kinds of controversies on YouTube over certain channels being demonetized, channels that aren't necessarily controversial, because you look at stuff like Alex Jones and like obviously extremely offensive. Obviously there are issues with that guy and the things he's said. But at the same time, the level of collusion, and I would use the word collusion, between all of the sites that banned him at once is scary. That is scary. That's some New World Order sort of stuff, to use, conspiratorial language. I mean, like, that is like some New World Order stuff of all these giant tech companies right at the same time. These guys who are in some of whom are in competition. It's not just Google and YouTube who have become the same thing, but some of these sites are kind of in competition, and it's really scary that they would all of a sudden ban somebody, and they've done it in a lot more minor ways, with for obvious social and political reasons. And I'm not even saying I disagree with their basic philosophies in every case. I'm not even saying I disagree with every aspect. I disagree with that sort of heavy-handed ideology, but I'm not saying I disagree with every facet of that ideology. I might agree with certain points that they generally support, but I don't like the heavy-handedness. It's that issue of, well, now that it's been done, it sets a precedent, and, of course they're going to target an extreme example because it's easier for people to swallow that. It's just, I just have concerns about that, some very obvious concerns. And if you don't, you're welcome to not be concerned, but at the same time, to turn on what I see. Why I say that is because I see people look at the people who are concerned, and they say, oh, so you support him, you support Alex Jones, or you support this guy, or you support the opposite of what I believe. That's basically what that becomes. If you're concerned about just the ethical issues that go along with a decision like that, to just ban somebody on multiple platforms, Uh, I don't know. This is about Paul Allen, and here I am. But it is about Paul Allen because I see those early Microsoft founders. I see Microsoft and early large computer internet forces like that. I see them in a different light now because I don't think that they tried to impact what people thought or what people were exposed to. I think they were just excited to provide those services, and that's what these companies are today. These companies that I'm criticizing, they are services too, and you pay for them, and you pay for these other services, and you paid for Microsoft, and Microsoft was a for-profit company who wanted to edge out the competition, wanted to control things. I'm not saying they were saints, the saints of computers, Saint Computer Microsoft. I'm not saying that they were, saint-like at all, saintly, saint-like, whatever it is. Um, but I think they did kind of take a step back and just say, hey, we're providing an amazing service, and it's going to be open. It's going to be People are going to be able to do what they want with it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody has some insight. I mean, this is all very anecdotal. I'm just a kid from the East Side who appreciates who Paul Allen was and is, because I think that Paul Allen is going to have a long-standing impact. But I do hope that the younger generations, who are now getting older, but the younger generations in the tech industry are looking at people like that who were there early on, and they can have that same desire to innovate that they currently do have, but that they aren't looking to shape the view of the world. They aren't looking to limit anything, because I think water will find its own level. And I think that's what early Microsoft was essentially doing. They were letting water find its own level. And my connection to Paul Allen is as a Seahawks fan. I appreciate the kind of owner he was. The Microsoft stuff, I'd never even, I forget he was a Microsoft founder. If he even was, I know that he was a very influential figure early on. I believe he was one of the founders. But so that goes to show you how much I think about that. So it's very little, but I did get to thinking about it today, and I feel like his approach to that is probably similar to the way he approached owning a giant football team. And my connection to him is ultimately through football. I appreciate the kind of football owner he was. From what I understand, he was also extremely charitable. He was a very charitable guy who did a lot of good in obvious ways, and in the traditional sense of charity, not just, oh, he saved a football team and saved the city. Not just in that sense, but in the sense that he actually, donated money to worthy causes. And I think on that level, he showed that he was a more than decent human, not a greedy plutocrat, but a more than decent human. And I think people will remember that. And he'll certainly be remembered by Seahawks fans as well. But it's very rare that a football team's owner dies and your first thought is like, that guy was a decent human who we lost. And that's how I feel about Paul Allen.